Moving on now to a high-profile court case. A judge in Russia has rejected an appeal and ordered Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich to remain in custody on charges of espionage. The American journalist was taken into custody in late March in Russia and appeared in court this Tuesday. He's the first U.S. reporter detained in Russia on spying charges since the end of the Cold War, and his arrest comes amid a brutal crackdown by the Kremlin on journalists since the start of the invasion of Ukraine. Gershkovich denies the accusations of espionage, as does Washington. And for more on the story, we're joined. Let's cross to Alexandra Filippenko. She's a political analyst and a senior researcher fellow at the Institute for U.S. and Canadian Studies and an expert on Russia. Thanks for being with us here on France 24. First of all, I just want to get your reaction to the fact that Gershkovich was denied bail. I suppose that doesn't come as a surprise.
Unfortunately, yes, for everyone who is following Russian politics, and especially Russian politics in the time of war, it's not a surprise at all. And we know that lawyers asked for house arrest and ban on certain actions, as well as bail for 50 million rubles that was supposed to pay by Dow Jones Company that owns Wall Street Journal. But it's not surprising that it was denied because we've seen a whole list of political prisoners being detained or already imprisoned in Russia right now.
Also, Gershkovich is accused of spying for the U.S. How does the Russian government plan to prove that he's guilty of espionage? What is the essence of this case they have against him?
The case is closed, so all the journalists and everyone is let inside the courthouse only for a photo op, and only after and only during not when Gershkovich talks or when his lawyers speak, only when the judge speaks. So it's a closed case, and we still don't know how will they try to prove it, because it seems that he's a journalist. He's been doing his job. And one interesting fact today, that when journalists were coming in to the courthouse, only foreign journalists were let in first, and only after that Russian journalists were let in. So I think that this shows how this case is made especially for foreign audiences, first of all, not for Russian audience. And so I think that for Russian audience, it doesn't even matter how they're going to prove it, because Russians are used to such political cases, and they don't even try to find some base for a political case. And we've been seeing it at a number of imprisonments in the past weeks, months, and years, of course, in Russia.
So can you tell us more about that? You're saying this is being played out for a foreign audience. Why is that?
Well, I think we should take a look at what Margarita Simonyan suggested just today in the morning. She's the voice of the Kremlin. She's editor-in-chief of Russian state-controlled media organization, Russia Today. And people like that, they don't really throw things around like that. And today in her Telegram account, she suggested exchanging Paul Whelan, convicted state prisoner Vladimir Kara-Murza, Russian state prisoner, and Evan Gershkovich for WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. She just wrote it: swap Whelan, Kara-Murza, and Gershkovich for Assange. For less than 3, they won't give him up, save 1 useful life at the cost of 3 harmful lives. So they think that Paul Whelan, Evan Gershkovich, and Vladimir Kara-Murza are harmful. So I think that people like that, they don't throw things around. She's the voice of the Kremlin, and maybe this is a message that Moscow cannot convey, and they want U.S. to figure it out for themselves. Vladimir Kara-Murza was just sentenced to 25 years in prison. Evan Gershkovich can get 20 years in prison, and Paul Whelan also 20 years in prison. So I think that this might be a sign. It might be a sign, first of all, for the West, and a sign that Moscow would like to get Julian Assange instead and give up Paul Whelan, Vladimir Kara-Murza, and Evan Gershkovich.
Well, so if there is no legal remedy, do you think there could be a prisoner exchange here?
Yeah, well, I think so. I think so. I think that there are two reasons for Evan Gershkovich's arrest. First of all, it's a sign for all foreign journalists to leave Russia, not to stay in Russia, and only report on or only work in Russia if they are working according to what Kremlin wants to hear and what Kremlin, propaganda or television, Russian state television says. And also, this is a prisoner. It's a prisoner for an exchange. This is a good opportunity to orchestrate such an exchange. And we do not know really what people, who Moscow wants to see actually, because there have been reports of 13 Russian potential spies, but they were detained and they were deported to Mexico. They were detained on a Mexico-U.S. border, and there were 13 who were deported back to Mexico. But we really don't know who've also been detained and who is in American prisons, who Moscow is interested in. So there can be a quite surprising prisoner swap, to my mind.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Alexandra Filippenko, political analyst and senior researcher fellow at the Institute for U.S. and Canadian Studies. Thanks so much for joining us here on France 24.